Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this plenary session. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce the speaker for this evening, Professor Aaron Ciechanover. Professor Ciechanover, requires very little introduction. You would have met him earlier this week in various sessions. And as many of you know, he's the Nobel laureate for the discovery of ubiquitination and protein degradation. And he's still very active in science, as well as illuminating more about the protein homeostasis in cells. He's also very active in drug discovery. But more than that, he's also been a very strong proponent for science and how science should benefit mankind. And I think today's topic is really very much in that advocacy role that he's been playing for society. And particularly relevant for us today as we battle COVID-19, not only in Singapore but for the rest of the world to overcome this pandemic. So, without further ado, I'll hand the time over to Professor Ciechanover. Professor, please.
Thank you very much. It's a little bit strange that I don't see you and you can see me on the screen. I wish that this year, 2022, will bring the end of the pandemic, and next year we shall all be able to meet again physically, let it be in Singapore or any place else in the world. So I'm a physician by education and also a scientist. And as was mentioned by the moderator, I discovered the ubiquitin proteolytic system. It's a very important quality control system in the body of all organisms, including plants, and that is responsible for quality control of proteins. And many drugs have been developed based on our discovery, mostly for cancer, but many more are in the pipeline for other diseases. Ourselves are also busy in developing a drug against cancer, but I decided not to talk to you about it today. Tomorrow, we are going to have a small group meeting, so those of you who are interested in joining, it will be kind of a free exchange of questions and answers. I will be able to address more of our own work. What I'm going to talk to you today is about the pandemic. But again, I decided not to talk about the biological side or the medical side of the pandemic, not about the virus, not about the variants, not about the vaccine, but I decided to talk about some other issues which are very bothering, and that's bioethical issues. I have another topic which is more general about bioethical issues related to the revolution of personalized medicine, but on that we shall talk some other time. I want to concentrate today, because it's such a subject that bothers us all, about bioethical issues related to the pandemic. And our time is short, so we shall try just to talk in kind of headlines. And afterwards, we shall have another session immediately after my talk of about 15 or 20 minutes, where I shall be able to answer some of your questions. Just to give you a background, you see in the picture, it's my city, the city of Haifa. I was born here, lived here almost all my life, and working in the medical school of the Technion. You see on the right side, you can see the building, the white building, and on the left side in the big picture, you see it's sitting just on the sea. This is the medical school, beautiful view to the Mediterranean, and we are very proud of this beautiful city. Okay, so let's go to some ethical issues that are related to the corona. I listed 5 of them. These are my own list. It's not necessarily all of them. Other people might see things different. There are treatment priority, neglected subject, vaccination, skepticism about vaccination, anti-vaccination movement, and then the infodemic and inequality and discrimination. And as I said, we shall use the time left in order to talk about each of them briefly. So let's talk about treatment priorities. In Israel, we met it, and the issue was, of course, it was during the first wave when we had a lot of severely sick patients, but we had a limited number of teams of intensive care unit teams, limited number of respirators, and the issue is who should be put on the respirator and who should not be put on the respirator. If you think about it, it's kind of giving us the permission as medical teams to decide who will live and who will die. Luckily, in Israel, because it's a very modern country and we are acting very quickly, we didn't reach the point of saturation. Nowadays, with the Omicron pandemic, we are far away from it. The disease is relatively light. We have relatively few severe patients. We have a very sophisticated medical system in Israel. But at the first and second wave, we were saturated, almost saturated. And we were few cases away from deciding whom to sort out, whom not to give the opportunity to survive. So how do you do it? You do it according to age. So there might be old people that are in better shape than younger people. You decide according to other severe diseases that the patients are having, like heart diseases or cancer or dementia, brain diseases. You know, who we are to decide how long the patient has to live, and you know whether we have a permission to take his or her life from him and from the family. Well, but circumstances enforce us to decide, and we set a committee of many wise, clever people, clergymen, legal people, sociologists, psychologists, physicians, nurses, to decide about a set of criteria and to build a score. It's not dependent on one criterion like age, like one disease. It's made of many criteria and scoring of each criterion. And if you are reaching a certain number, means you cannot get the life-saving treatment. If you are not reaching it, it means you can get it, so you don't have the contract criteria. And luckily, we didn't get there. But we were lucky. Other countries were not lucky. And you should ask yourself in your own countries. I don't know. Typically, when I'm running this meeting, the opening question is, of course, where are you from? And people are coming from different countries. They are coming from Indonesia, from India, from America, from more developed countries, from less developed countries. And I'm sure that in some of your countries, physicians and medical teams have faced this problem. Maybe they didn't discuss it, but they faced it. One of the countries that they faced it is, of course, Italy. And look, I will bring to you along my short talk just examples from the professional literature. I'm not making it up. So you see, this is taken from Nature, and it says Italian doctors, this was happening in Milan in the first or second wave. Italian doctors on coronavirus frontline face tough calls on whom to save. So you see, this was a practical question, not only in Italy. I can tell you that in Spain, I can tell you that in America, and I'm sure that more so in less developed countries. Another issue, the second one that I wanted to discuss with you is, of course, neglected subjects. You know, pandemic has affected all of us all over the world. And at the same time, we neglected other subjects. We neglected climate change, but mostly in our own medical system, we neglected other diseases. You can imagine, as related to the first issue, the treatment priorities, I'm working in a medical school, and the medical school has a huge hospital next to us. We have a big hospital of more than 1,200 beds. It's a very good comprehensive hospital. But the flooding with corona patients had to force us to close some of our departments. We closed some of the department of surgery, we closed oncology, we closed hematology, and we treated only urgent cases in those departments. The number of surgeries went down by 80%, the number of cancer treatment went down by almost 80%, and so on and so forth, in order to make space for corona patients. We converted many of our wards in the hospital, many of our departments, into corona departments. And many other patients did not have access to their routine treatments. You know, we caused a lot of damage by that. Who told us the treatment of corona has a priority over a treatment of heart patient, of a cancer patient, of a patient that needs a surgery? Who told us that we have not caused worsening of the situation, making it worse of other patients by making space to corona patients? How can we decide which patients can still get treatment and which patients should not get the treatment that they deserve? Right? It's not like the first priority, like the first subject we were talking about, treatment priority, which is life and death. But yes, it is about bettering or worsening the situation of patients with other diseases. I'm sure that we caused a lot of damage to other patients, a lot of harm to other patients, that their situation deteriorated. And, you know, the same is for dealing with climate change. Climate change is behind our corner. Actually, it's not behind the corner. It's already in. So here you have kind of a cartoon that people are looking at the television about the news of COVID-19, but meanwhile, climate change is coming as a storm and threatens to drown them in the big disaster of climate change. So how we decide how to prioritize general subject in the society. Think about the pandemic of hunger. You know, we didn't deal at all with the pandemic of hunger. Look at the right side on a paper of Nature. AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis are surging. Other diseases that are not being treated. People don't get immunization against tuberculosis. People don't get treatment for AIDS, for malaria. In less developed countries, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, their situation is worsening. Think about cancer research. Pandemic to delay cancer advances by nearly 18 months. Can you think that by a year and a half, we are postponing the development of other treatment for other diseases like cancer? Can you imagine how many people are going to die because new drugs, novel drugs, are making later by a year and a half to arrive at the market? So this is another issue that we have not solved. Vaccination. Vaccination is a big issue. I will not talk about all the problems of vaccination. We don't know a lot of vaccines that were developed in China. For example, we don't know a lot on vaccines that were developed in Russia. But this is not the issue about the type of the vaccine, whether it's a Sinopharm or Sinovac or Sputnik, the Russian. They are all working one way or another. The issue is the movement of anti-vaccination. And this is related also to the infodemic, to number 4, on which we'll talk. But let's talk about the United States. There has been huge movement against vaccination in the United States, which spread all over the world, including to my own country. In Israel, we are a very small country. We are about 9 million people, and about 1 million people are raising their voice that they are not going to be vaccinated. And let's read what's written on here. Trust in God, not vaccine. Look at the lower right side. No mandatory vaccination, no microchipping. People are afraid that instead of being injected with a vaccine, the government is injecting to them a microchip that can follow them, that can tell the government where they are. No tyranny, no fear, and so on and so forth. No vaccine. Look at here. This is a planned global power. Grab the messenger RNA. The messenger RNA vaccine will kill millions more than COVID. So the vaccine is going to kill people, not the disease. So what is the source of this anti-vaccination? There are two sources. One of them has to do with the medical institution themselves. Here you have an example of a physician, a British physician by Andrew Wakefield, who published, he's a doctor, and he published papers, a book, and then a paper, and then a book that is telling us that the vaccine against MMR, against measles, mumps, and rubella causes autism. So mothers to young children decided to stop their vaccination of the children against MMR against the triple diseases of measles, mumps, and rubella, and many of them got the disease and died because they were afraid that the doctor said that it's causing autism. Of course, it was a lie, it was a misinformation, and it took years to revert it and to find out that the doctor fooled the world. We don't know why he did it. And you see it here. Another book came 10 years later, but meanwhile, hundreds of children got the disease and thousands of children got the disease, and many of them died. And you see here on the right side, again from Nature, the discredited doctor held by anti-vaccine movement. The anti-vaccine people are those that hailed him, that kind of promoted him, but it was a disaster. I can tell you another issue. There was in Japan, there was a rumor, again, a misinformation, that young girls that get vaccination against the human papillomavirus, which protects them from uterine cervical carcinoma, from cancer of the cervix of the uterus, the vaccination against it, which is extremely efficient, but the rumor told them, the misinformation told them that it causes some disorders in movement, that it will affect their legs and their hands, and they will have movement disorders. And the mothers stopped for several years to vaccinate their daughters against human papillomavirus. Within less than a decade, 25,000 Japanese women got cancer of the uterus, non-vaccinated. 6,000 of them are already dead. And I can tell you that at least another 6,000 are going to die until the government discovered that this was a lie and reinstated the vaccination plan. So rumors that are coming from the medical institutions are one reason why people are stopping vaccinating and why people are against it. But there is another issue. And the other issue is lack of trust in the government. And look at this. This was a poll that was running in the United States and asking people, this was before the vaccine, so it's more than a little bit a year old. It was at the end of, I would say, in 2020, before the first vaccine came to the market. And the question was, do you plan to get a corona vaccine when one is available? And look at the people that says yes, and look at the people that says no. Don't look at the other one, just the yes and the no. Look at the people age 60 and older, people that are old, that are a little bit afraid of the disease, that are a little bit wild, that they have experience in life. 67% yes, 12% said no. But look at the black people, with the black discriminated minority in the United States. 25 said yes, and 40 said no. Almost threefold the opposite from the age 60 and older. And the rest are in the middle. What is it about the black people? They don't trust the American government. And you know why? They are right. There is no reason for them to trust the American government and the American people. They have been discriminated based on their color for many years. But let's talk about a single case. And the single case is called the Tuskegee Experiment, the Tuskegee study. American physicians who are responsible for our health decided to make an experiment and to take 400 black people who got syphilis in a village, in a small city called Tuskegee, and not to treat them. You know, syphilis is a very easy disease to treat. It's a sexually transmitted disease by a bacteria called Treponema pallidum. And with simple antibiotic, once there is the first lesion, you can treat it. But once the disease advances, comes along the neurons, and it gets to the brain, and then people are suffering from very severe nervous diseases and dementia, and they are dying. They decided, the physicians, not to treat the patients, against the very swear that they swore when they graduated medical school, to help anybody, regardless of money, regardless of sex, regardless of religious, regardless of skin color, regardless of anything. We are obliged by swearing to treat anybody that need medical help. I remember very well myself swearing this oath. And this physician betrayed, don't use any other word, betrayed their swear, their oath, and decided to inject the patients with water, telling them that they are injecting them with the treatment in order to follow the natural evolvement of the disease. The experiment took 40 years, from 1932 to 1972. 200 of the patients out of the 400 died intentionally. I would say they were murdered. They did not die. They murdered by their physicians in order to satisfy a stupid curiosity of the physicians to see the natural development of the disease. The experiment was stopped because it was discovered by the New York Times and other media, and the American government, and later on the President of the United States, asked for excuse, for forgiveness from the Black community. So why should they trust the government? And therefore, now you should trust the government, because I think that governments want people not to get sick. But you have to think long term. When the government asks for our trust, the trust is being gained along many years of trustworthiness. The government cannot lie to you one evening and ask for your trust the next morning. That will never happen. So this is a big damage that happened to us now in the pandemic, that the Black people are still not trusting, and rightly so, the American government. So as I said, the anti-vaccine movement has two roots. Of course, people are believing in all kinds of stupidities. They don't understand the biology. They don't understand medicine. All in all, the vaccines are extremely safe, and they reflect major achievement in science. Scientists should be admired for this development, which took decades on decades. You know, the messenger RNA vaccine is based on knowledge that has been gained since the early 50s, since the discovery of DNA and then messenger RNA and the genetic code and so on and so forth. But again, you see that it's not only science that people don't understand, because they rely more on politicians, and politicians are kind of sitting in between the crowd, the people, and the scientists. And if you don't trust the politicians, certainly you don't trust the scientists. So this is another issue. There are other issues that are related to vaccines. For example, rich countries can vaccinate their people. Israel is regarded as a very rich country. I myself got 4 injections, the first 2, then the booster, then another booster, and we have enough vaccine for ourselves. But the issue is it right that we are not sharing our richness with less lucky countries like in Africa or in Southeast Asia that cannot afford buying the appropriate amount of vaccine necessary to vaccinate all the population. So there is inequality in the division of the vaccine between different countries. There is an issue of vaccination priority between different countries. So let's move to the other subject. And the other subject is infodemic. This is another disease, and I don't know which disease is worse, the disease of infodemic or COVID-19. Unfortunately, the social networks like Twitter and Facebook betrayed us as well. Instead of serving the purpose of benefiting and helping the society in the name of democracy, in the name of freedom of speech. They let anybody talk, and people, they are malicious people. They disseminated all kinds of information along this, using these social networks. They disseminated information about the damage of vaccine, about infertility and sterility, and about heart diseases that are very common where they are extremely rare, and so on and so forth, about drugs that do not have any beneficial effect, and so on and so forth. And the infodemic, the pandemic of information, is divided into disinformation and misinformation. I will not go into the difference between the two because of the shortage of time. But in the social network, we are following basically stars. I am not sitting on any social network. You can trust me. I don't believe in this way of communication, and I think that it's unreliable and untrustworthy. And in my opinion, it's stupid. But famous people have their own followers, millions of followers. And think about two people. One of them was the past president of the United States that advertised different drugs. He has no clue about pharmacology. He has no clue about science. But nevertheless, he recommended hydroxychloroquine that works in treating early stage coronavirus. Of course, it turned out to be wrong, and so on and so forth. Why should the president of the biggest country in the world, of the most, not the biggest, the most developed country in the world, should deal with it? Why shouldn't he give the permission to his physicians and scientists to talk? And many people followed him. They don't know, they hear, they do. They don't have tools to judge, to think what is right and what is wrong. And think about Madonna. Madonna has millions of followers. She is really a star, a superstar. And she told us in her Facebook page that basically the coronavirus is a conspiracy theory, and if there is a vaccination, it's vaccination only for the rich people, for the people that can afford it, and not for the poor people, and just forget about corona, and so on and so forth. Why should she do it? Instead of serving the community, instead of promoting vaccination, instead of admitting that corona is a true disease. By the way, I just read yesterday the death toll of corona. How many people died? Well, the official number is something between 5.5 to 6 million people. The real number is probably 20 million people. 20 million people, more than the people that died in World War II, were succumbing to corona, while people like Trump and Madonna deny that it all existing. Instead of walking into the hospitals and see how they collapse, they use the social networks in order to disseminate lies. So I have something to say about the social networks. They did not serve the society. And the last one is inequality and discrimination. We are living in a very stressful society. And in a stressful society, any stress leads to rising of racism and discrimination and anti-gender feeling, and so on and so forth. Think about depression in Germany, in Europe, in the late 20s, which gave rise to the Nazi movement. Any change in the economy, any change in the health state, any major disaster brings from underneath the surface a very bad feeling that shakes the society. It just tells you that basically all our nice behavior is thin, very thin. It's breakable. Basically, our wild feelings, our animal senses are live behind a very thin layer of politeness, of being nice. And the pandemic of COVID was not different. and many racist feeling came up. You remember very well what happened in Minnesota when Chauvin, a policeman, a white policeman, really suffocated to death Floyd George, a black person, by pushing his knee against his neck and basically murdering him during a kind of a protest, which led to a counter a protest in the United States, which called Black Lives Matter. It matters that black people, we live and we live in dignity. But this is outside the scientific and medical world. But inside the scientific and medical world, we are suffering from the same problem. And it's amazing because as scientists, we believe in facts, we believe in equality, we believe that people should be judged by merit, by their contribution, and not by their skin color, not by their gender, and not by their religion, but forget about it. We are all the same. And look, I tell you, I bring you something that was published in Cell and in Nature. In Cell, there was a leading article, editorial, Science has a racism problem. Within science, we are discriminated women, we are discriminating black people, we are discriminating Hispanics, and so on and so forth. And on the right side, white senior academics still resist recognizing racism. So you see, we are exactly like the average people, like the average person in the street, prejudiced, discriminating, and it's awfully, awfully disappointing. But at the end of the day, let's look at science, because science is truly our co-pilot. Science is indifferent to what we are doing. Science is science. You know, the vaccination is either working or not working. The drug for cancer that we are developing will work or will not work. And it will be done by objective people all over the world that don't know us. So at the end of the day, we should really trust science, but we should also adapt to the rule of science. And the rules of science are humbleness and objectivity. We should judge each other, we should judge the facts just by merit, and we should leave all other considerations aside. And actually, more importantly, we should serve as an example to the society, as leaders that lead the society rather than being led by prejudice, by discrimination, and racism. So thank you very much for your attention. I had a lot more to say, but we are limited by time, and we shall take questions now. So all the very best to you. Good luck to you wherever you are, and basically also good luck in your career wherever it is going to take you. And thank you again very much for your attention.
Professor Ciechanover. And the questions have been coming in. I think everyone has been following your talk with enthusiasm. Thank you for the the very thorough overview of all the issues, but also the inspiring words at the end. There are a couple of questions related to how you personally responded to questions from the media, from people who are concerned about COVID-19 and to the SARS coronavirus when it first emerged in beginning of 2020, when the scientific information available was then lacking. How did you deal with uncertainties, and how should scientists respond to those kinds of questions when information was less reliable at that point in time?
Well, at the end of the day, the information came very quickly. Even the Chinese released the sequence of the virus, which allowed Moderna and Pfizer to develop the messenger RNA vaccine, and other companies to develop more traditional vaccines, which are based on either the attenuated virus or the purified spike protein. There was some hesitation, but I think that all in all, the scientific community has shown quite a mature approach. And the matter of the fact that less than a year from the breakout of the pandemic. I remember it well. I was in Singapore actually in January of 2020 in the GYSS meeting. Actually, I was in Singapore 6 weeks ago between the waves, and I was supposed to be now, but I was not diagnosed. I was diagnosed with like marginally positive, so I decided not to take the risk. I'm completely healthy and very fine. I remember it very well. So less than a year from the first breakout, which was, well, it depends how you look at the cases, either January or of 2020 or December of 2019. December, I got my first shot. It's unheard of. The first shot after clinical trials, after development, 11 months for development of a drug, unheard of. I think that all in all, from all over the world, from China, across the world, the scientific community forgot about competition, forgot about ego, and did its job very well. We are now in a very different situation than we were 2 years ago.
Absolutely. And there are, on this issue of the rapid development of vaccine, that, as you say, we also had to combat a lot of misinformation on vaccines about how this is not safe because it was developed so quickly. So there's several questions related to how do we improve the trust between the public and scientists, right? Should we have more scientists and engineers in the government as politicians to advocate for science? Why is there? Then there's also a question on why some doctors and scientists are actually involved in anti-vaccine movement, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, the second question is very difficult. I just cannot understand it. I brought one example of Andrew Wakefield, the pediatrician from Britain, from the UK, who published a lie that caused huge damage. Actually, he's a murderer. You think about it, there is no other way but to call him a murderer, a mass murderer. He didn't murder one kid, he murdered numerous of them. But it's hard to believe that you are studying in a medical school, you are studying in a university, you have an approach to scientific information, and nevertheless, you say the opposite. How can you do it? I mean, what is it all about? Well, I have no explanation to this. But let's go to the first part. I think that we need really to educate the public, and I think that scientists, including Nobel laureates, and I'm doing it a lot, should come to the media. We should not enclose ourselves in an ivory tower of our laboratories and trust the politicians or the journalists or the media people to explain. I think that we do have authority. I think that we do have influence, and prominent scientists, I'm not saying only Nobel laureates, should come to the medium and explain in simple words with simple drawings that the vaccine is working. It's not harmful at all. There is statistics. People are not, if people don't believe and they have their own opinion, and if you feel that you are moving in parallel lines and there is no way you can convince, then, what can you do? But I think that we should do any effort to put scientists in governments, to put scientists and technologists and engineers in different bodies that are shaping and carving policy, but mostly in the media. The media is extremely powerful. And I think also, and maybe people will not like me for that idea, but I couldn't care less about whether people like me or not. We should control in some way also the social networks. In the name of democracy, we cannot cause harm. We cannot kill people in the name of so-called freedom of speech. This is unheard of and unacceptable.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that even more. There is a question on how serious are the COVID-19 pandemic ethical issues compared to those that arose from other pandemics or other epidemics in the past. What's special about COVID-19 that kind of separated from other outbreaks?
Well, I don't think that the magnitude of what happened with COVID-19 can be compared to anything else. Of course, if you're looking at the big pandemic at the turn of the 19th century to the 20th century, let's take the flu pandemic in 1918, there was no communication, no television, no flights, no airplanes, no nothing. People didn't know anything. The only thing that we can compare it is a little bit to SARS, maybe, a little bit to AIDS, maybe, but SARS luckily was kind of self-containing, and AIDS, we learned very quickly about how to behave and how to protect ourselves. Even the gay society, which I respect enormously, learned how to take cautious steps, precautious steps. So the magnitude was not the same. And also drugs were developed against AIDS, against other. So there is nothing to compare. But there will be additional pandemics. No doubt about it. We are pushing for it. They are all handmade, man-made. And I think that we should learn all the lessons from this one in order to get ready for the next one, including involvement of scientists in the media, including the use of the social networks, because the next one is behind the corner. So I think that this is the first one from which we can really learn a good lesson for the next one, which is sure to come.
Absolutely. Rachel Moses asked a very related question to what you've just said. And she asked if, one of the issues with science is that, or at least in this pandemic, is that the science was played out right in front of the public's eyes. So on one hand, with early information that came out, a few days later, there's a revision and a slightly evolved interpretation of the scientific data. So her question is really about how non-scientists can follow how the scientific understanding evolve as we get more and more data. So how do we keep the public from becoming confused by all these changes?
I'm not a magician, but I can tell you one thing. I can talk about the ubiquitin system, which I co-discovered, to kindergarten children. I can take children of 5 years old and explain them what we did. Not with biochemistry, not with nothing. I can explain them about irreversible changes that occur to protein. We can talk about how you fry an egg. You take an egg and you fry it, but you cannot take the egg back to become natural, and they understand it. So I think that with simple language, you can use illustrators to develop very simple drawings and explain it to anybody. Don't underestimate the understanding and the knowledge of people. Everything, even the most complicated one, is explainable. We just need some scientists and talented people and talented illustrators to bring it on the table. It is possible.
Yeah. So related to all that you've said, I mean, how should universities and graduate schools respond to the needs of society, right? So I'm just saying, like, for one thing, medical schools, graduate schools, no one trained us to speak to the public. No one tells us about how to communicate with lay people, right? We're trained to talk to other doctors, we're trained to talk to other scientists. How important is that for us, moving forward? That perhaps is there room for universities to now begin to think of, training scientists to also be advocates?
I think that yes, exactly. You are absolutely right. I think that the universities, they are changing their view these days. But what I think is that they see their role in a very narrow way. They look at their role as educating professional to the market. We have a medical school. We need every year to put 100 doctors in the market, and we don't care much more, or 100 engineers to the market. No, they should change their view. They should get involved with the community online. Students should be trained to talk to people, should be trained to talk to the communication, to the media, should be trained to think, I would say, clearly, to express complicated idea in a simple manner. I think that the curriculum in the university should really change, so the university, along the educational path, should keep online communication with the community and the society. We are not only putting professional into the market in order to treat patients. We are putting into the market, we are educating people to live in the society. And living in the society means much more than your very narrow profession. It means getting involved in a much broader way. And I think that universities are paying attention now. We are not only professional schools, we are much more than that. But no doubt that this new role of the universities, about which we learned a lot during the pandemic, should be broadened and deepened in whole higher education institutions worldwide.
So we're coming to about 5 minutes before, or less than 5 minutes now before we end. Maybe a last few questions that we can tackle. And one of them is, related to how it takes time for us to communicate with the public and convince them that, some things are safe. Is there a role for mandatory vaccination?
Well, this is, I'm living in a so-called democracy. Israel is known, I would say it's a democracy with few dents. It's not perfect democracy. And I am, if you are not vaccinated, you are endangering other people, right? Which means that you are not much different than a drunken driver driving 250 kilometers an hour. So I'm against forced vaccination, but if you are not ready to be vaccinated, stay home. Don't endanger me. Take your food by order. It will be put next to your door. Don't get out. Don't endanger me. This is, I think, if you have an idea, hold to it. And I bring you one example. The Witness of Jehovah. There is a small section, that refuse getting blood. And they tell you as a surgeon, I am a surgeon by training, if you are operating on me and there is a need to transfuse me blood, let me die. Don't transfuse any blood to me from other people. These people are ready to die, to sacrifice their lives on their ideology. This is something that I respect. But if you want not to vaccinate yourself and at the same time you are asking for the same rights that I have, to go to the supermarket, to go to the theater, to go to the public, to go to school, you are endangering my life. You are endangering my life. You are endangering the life of the members of my family. Why should you do it? So if you are anti-vaxxer because of ideology, please quarantine yourself.
Thank you. And one final question. How do you think COVID-19 is going to play out? What will happen this year? Will pandemic come? Will live change?
I'm not a public health expert, and I'm not an infectious diseases expert. I studied medicine, but many years ago, I'm not practicing medicine anymore. I think that with Omicron, we have some hope that so many people will be infected that there will be maybe something close to herd immunity, and the virus will not find any host. And I think that with the Omicron also we learned that we can live with the disease side by side. In Israel, we are attenuating gradually all the quarantine rules. People are ready to get out after a quarantine of 5 days. It might be even shortened. Yesterday, the government changed it from 7 to 5 days. You need a simple test, a simple antigen home test. But basically what we should do, we should really trust one another. We cannot lie. We cannot cheat. The government actually relayed the responsibility that she took initially to the people. Again, as I said about the anti-vaxxers, we are responsible to one another as a society, and we should take this responsibility very seriously and live with it side by side. Like we live with flu. Every year we have a wave of flu that hits all countries all over the world. Maybe it will become kind of a seasonal disease. And don't forget also, we have not only vaccines, we have drugs. Pfizer and Merck and Novartis came with new drugs to attenuate the severity of symptoms. So we developed also anti-COVID-19 measures. So all in all, let's say I'm cautiously optimistic.
On that note, on a very optimistic note, thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you have taken to speak to us and to take all these answers. I hope to be able to see you in Singapore next year as well, or perhaps even sooner.
Me too.
Thank you very much.
All the best. Take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.